Last week, 4 anti-genocide activists were convicted for criminal damage at a factory belonging to Israel's largest arms manufacturer, Elbit Systems, located in Filton, near Bristol. One of them was also convicted of grievous bodily harm without intent. They now face the possibility of being convicted as terrorists. 2 others were found not guilty. They were part of Palestine Action, a direct action group that was banned as a terrorist organisation by the British government shortly after the attack on the Filton factory. The ban was later overturned on appeal. The government is now appealing this decision. Over 3,000 people have been arrested for expressing support for Palestine Action. This was the second trial the 6 Filton defendants had faced. The first failed to convict. Whatever your view of Palestine Action, it's clear a fundamental erosion of British civil liberties is underway. In the House of Commons last month, independent MP Zara Sultana used parliamentary privilege to denounce what she claimed were irregularities in the legal process.
6 Palestine Action activists face retrial after being acquitted in February following a year in prison. If convicted, they and 18 others will be sentenced as terrorists, but the jury will not be told that. They could convict them on criminal damage charges with no idea that terrorism sentences will follow. Madam Deputy Speaker, not a single terrorism charge has been brought forward. The prescription has been ruled unlawful, and the defendants themselves have been banned from telling the jury that they acted to stop genocide under threat of contempt charges. This is what a stitch-up looks like.
Until restrictions were lifted just a few days ago, the media was forbidden from reporting Zara Sultana's comments or any of the issues she had raised. I spoke to Zoe Rogers and Jordan Devlin, the 2 activists who were acquitted last week.
Zoe, both of you, in your final address to the jury in the trial, you gave the address yourself rather than your barrister. Why was that?
In the previous trial, the judge had brought contempt proceedings against Rajiv and...
Rajiv, the barrister?
Yes, for simply telling the jury the law. Him doing that was effectively his way of threatening our barristers into not representing us properly.
So you were concerned your barrister would not be able to fully defend you in the final address before the jury in the second trial, because after the first trial, one of the barristers had been charged with contempt of court. What exactly was he supposed to have done wrong in the first trial, Jordan?
We were incredibly confused. All of the barristers couldn't find where this line that he'd crossed, but it kind of boils down to suggesting that the jurors have jury equity, which is the right to acquit on moral conscience if they think we've did the right thing.
So to be clear on this, after the first trial, one of the barristers faced contempt of court charges for simply reminding the jury that they have the right to convict, to judge according to their conscience. Mm-hmm. But there was also a second restriction on how your barristers could defend you in both trials, which seems to me in a way even more significant. It's called lawful excuse. They could not use lawful excuse. What does that mean, Zoe?
So it's enshrined in law that there are defences for kind of breaking certain laws. So you can damage property to save lives. It's called the defence of necessity. There's also the defence of prevention of crime and several others, but those were the 2 that I argued for.
So let's just be clear on this. A lawful excuse defence is when you have the right to say, yes, I did this, but I did it for a greater good. I did it to stop children being killed in Gaza, or I did it to save the planet, whatever it might be. You were not allowed to explain why you had done this. Is that right, Jordan?
Throughout both trials, really, we're not allowed to talk about motivation in any capacity, which means we're raiding an Elbit factory, but we're not allowed to tell you what Elbit does. We're not allowed to tell you what these drones are used for, and kind of any sort of personal stories that have affected us deeply.
That must have left the jury, Zoe, very confused. I mean, you don't seem like the sort of person who would just spontaneously break into a weapons factory.
Yeah. And the other thing it does is essentially give them only one option, which is to convict us. Our barristers argued in court that removing our defences was equivalent to the judge directing the jury to convict, which the judge is explicitly barred from doing. It effectively, our right to a fair trial ended there at that ruling before our trial had even begun.
Yeah.
Reporting restrictions have only been lifted in the last few days, which is why we're able to talk about this. All during the trial, these restrictions on your defence also could not be reported by the media, and that's true of the third point we'll come to now as well, which is the business of the terrorist connection. The judge has the right to rule that there is a terrorist connection. Now that your co-defendants have been sentenced. Jordan, what does that mean?
So terrorist connection that he has found is nothing to do with violence. It's purely based on property damage. Criminal damage, absolute maximum, 4 years. We've already done that time. I think it's 19 is the sort of maximum.
So with parole, even if they got the longest sentence, they would be out at that point.
Without the terrorist connection. Yeah. But with the terrorist connection, you have to serve 2/3 in prison. After you've done the 2/3 with the terrorist connection, you'd have to please a parole board. And to do that, you'd have to rescind your beliefs in that what we did was protecting lives and it was a humane thing to do. And then after the sentence is complete, they would have to be on notice for, I think it's between 10 and 15 years, but it could be up to 30, where you would have to report every relationship you're in, every time you have a new device, change address, so many different elements of your life.
Zoe, during the trial, was the jury aware of this possibility?
No. If it had ever been mentioned to the jury would have been thrown out and there would have been a retrial.
Right. So the judge has reserved the right for himself to impose far more onerous punishments and so on you after conviction, and the jury was not aware of this during the trial.
So the jury effectively found us guilty of criminal damage, but the 4 people who are in prison right now will be sentenced as terrorists, most likely. I mean, we weren't allowed to say the words genocide and ethnic cleansing. We weren't allowed to justify or even explain our actions. And the jury had no idea that there were defences that had been ruled out. They had no idea that we would be sentenced as terrorists.
Right, so you faced a trial where you were not allowed to explain why you had done this. You were not allowed to explain the background of genocide and ethnic cleansing. The judge reserved for himself the right to sentence you as terrorists after the conviction without the jury knowing that. And your barristers were forbidden from mentioning to the jury that they were allowed to apply their own conscience, their own convictions. They didn't have to be guided by the judge. And throughout all of this, we as the media were not allowed to report any of this.
No, I was just going to say that through this, I've just realised how important the role of the media is in defending the British public's natural rights, because without people knowing about it, the powers that be just get away with really insane things.
I mean, the purpose it served was justifying prescription.
The prescription of Palestine Action.
Yes, exactly.
You think it's very much tied to that?
Oh, absolutely. That's the entire reason we were arrested with terrorism in the first place.
Because, to be clear, when you did the action at Filton, Palestine Action at that stage were not prescribed.
No, but there were discussions going on about prescribing Palestine Action just 2 months before our action took place. There were discussions between the CPS and counter-terror police about prescribing Palestine Action. And of course, they don't have the ability to prescribe. But what they can do is arrest people for terrorism and prosecute people for terrorism. And that is what happened.
On the night of the action, what you hear again and again and again about Palestine Action is that they attack police women with pickaxes. That's what's the sort of headline thing that cuts through to the public. You were both there. Jordan, what actually happened? Because one of your co-defendants has been sentenced for grievous bodily harm without intent.
Yeah. Well, in the lead up to that event, there was a number of incidents from the security attacking us first. So we get inside this warehouse and then out of nowhere I hear this screaming, and that's Charlotte Head on the ground behind these dividers and this black-dressed figure looming over her. Then later there was another guard who attacked me. He barged into me, then kicked me, hit me a few times with the sledgehammer that he's taken off Zoe. Then we sort of struggled to try and control these sledgehammers. He attempts to bite me, but before he does that, he rubs up against me to turn his body camera off. And then he hit me in the face with the metal end of the sledgehammer in there. The police come in. They don't shout, police, police, you know, you're under arrest or anything like that. They just panic in there. And I think they've been told by Elbit that there's some sort of a different situation than there really was. They
think you are more of a threat than you are. Okay.
There's just so many things that happened before Sam's incident that led up to that. And he was in such a stressful situation. He was pavid in his face. He couldn't see. He was confused.
He was what in his face?
Pava is like pepper spray. It's just
so
more.
He'd been pepper sprayed. Okay.
It is seriously good gear. Completely blind at one point. Just it hurts to open your eyes. And then he heard this horrific screaming because Ellie Cameo was tasered, but then with the metal barbs still stuck into her, the police officer rolled her around on these barbs, obviously very painful. And she's screaming out this horrific, painful scream. Sam hears that, and then with his blurry vision and confusion, and especially since the police didn't announce their presence, they, he hits the police officer, and it's just a terrible, terrible accident of confusion and miscommunication.
Yeah. And a mistake, because you're all trained in non-violence.
Yeah, he knows it was a mistake, and he obviously regrets it deeply. I was in a cell with him for 6 months, and he was distraught that he did that, and he's upset with himself for getting the wrong end of the stick.
So to be clear then, your contention is you had entered in order to cause damage to property. You were attacked by the security guards, and many of those incidents where they're attacking you, the security cameras weren't working, or the footage is missing, or whatever. And it's in that context that Sam, your co-defendant, hits the police officer, and for which he's been sentenced for GBH.
The lead up to that point was so violent on the part of the security. And that part has just been left out of most media. Yeah.
Zoe, you lost 10% of your body weight during the trial. To be clear, neither of you were ever on hunger strike, but you lost 10% of your body weight during the trial. Why?
Because I wasn't being fed properly. I have kind of always struggled with eating, but as a result of just complete neglect by the Serco staff, I wasn't able to eat every single day until about 9 p.m. when I got back to prison. And it became an issue when I was giving evidence because I needed to be able to focus. And we asked for a banana so that I could have something to eat. And the Serco staff refused.
Serco being the security company?
Yes.
Well, all you wanted was a banana. Surely it's not complicated.
Well, exactly.
Why was Serco saying they couldn't give you a banana?
Security, which is their answer for everything.
Well, I don't even begin to understand the
Well,
logic.
neither do I. It doesn't make any sense. The prison was sending me and my 3 female co-defendants off with packed lunches.
You had a signed note from the governor, didn't you?
We had a signed note from the governor of the prison, and Serco still would not allow us to eat them.
Serco, the security company.
Yes. Serco, who has contracts with Elbit Systems.
And you were pointing out, Jordan, this actually has monetary effects, doesn't it?
The threat of this banana alone has cost the taxpayer some 20 grand. So the cost of courts to be run for a day is insane, and we've had...
So the delay while the business of the banana was sorted out.
This banana took up half a day, and then we've had to dismiss the jury for the rest of the day.
How long had you spent in prison awaiting trial?
15 months. But by the time our trial had finished, we'd spent 18 months in custody without having been convicted of anything.
So you were cleared twice. You had 2 trials, you were cleared twice, but yet you've spent 18 months in prison.
Yeah.
How long did you spend in prison?
18 months as well.
Okay, now again, how does this work? Are you not entitled to any compensation?
They've just made it really, really difficult to get. Theoretically, I'm entitled to it, but my lawyer just says it's nearly impossible.
Why were you on prison? Why didn't you get bail? Neither of you was facing charges for any act of violence. It was purely an act of, an act against property.
It was never about the violence. The violence was always an allegation that was used to justify prescription in the public realm. But they needed to paint us as violent criminals, hence keeping us in prison. And also, I think it was also partly using us as a deterrence to stop other people from taking action, which didn't work.
No. Zoe, what were conditions like for you in prison? And also, how did they compare with other prisoners?
Well, so even before I was put in prison, our conditions were different because we'd been arrested for terrorism. We were held in a counter-terror suite, which meant we could be kept without charge for 2 weeks. In the end, it was only 1 week. But we were kept in cells with the lights on 24/7, taken for frequent interrogation, some of them in the middle of the night, and we were held incommunicado. And then when we were in prison, we were held as tact prisoners, which meant that our security was managed by the terrorism section of the security team. We had non-association, which meant we weren't allowed to talk to each other.
So you were arrested at a time when Palestine Action was not prescribed as a terrorist organisation, but yet you were treated as terrorists.
Yes.
It's becoming clear to me that the whole thing is intimately bound up with the prescription of Palestine Action for as a terrorist organisation. In order to make that stick and to make it stick in the public mind, they basically have to portray you as terrorists.
Yeah.
It's entirely based on meeting an agenda rather than looking at the facts of the case and taking it from there.
Zoe, just articulate for us what you were not allowed to articulate in the trial, which is why you did this.
Like many people, I was watching a genocide unfold live on my phone, and I was horrified to find out that the weapons being used to kill people were being manufactured in the UK in places such as Bristol and Leicester and Kent. And so I tried every democratic means available to me to stop the flow of weapons. And we all did. I went on marches, wrote to my MP, signed petitions. I even did a picket outside an arms factory. But none of it worked. And it was clear that the democratic process had failed to protect Palestinians from genocide, and the international law had also failed. And the only effective option available to me was to take direct action.
This is an emergency. There are people dying every day by using these weapons, and it's not something that you can just say, oh, maybe we can deal with that next month. It's an absolute catastrophe and emergency that needs to be dealt with yesterday,
Genocide can happen very quickly. The Rwandan genocide took only 100 days to kill 1 million people, so it is important to take effective action as soon as the signs of genocide begin.
So sentencing takes place on the 12th of June, is that right?
Yes, at Woolwich Crown Court, and anyone can turn up and show their support outside.
That's Woolwich Crown Court in South East London.
10 a.m. to 5 p.m. If you can show up at any part of the day, it would be greatly appreciated. We just need people to witness what is going to happen to British democracy, and this is a major turning point in the law in the UK and your rights as a citizen.
Zoe Jordan, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.